finally able to see each other in the same room, even when we were socially distanced. There was just like so much emotion behind it, I think, just being able to play that way. And I mean, I really have to believe it made the album that much better because it's like we were just fully present and just like appreciating every note we could play together in a room.
It's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, and welcome to another episode of Around Town. And today we've got Michele Thomas, the wonderful vocalist, composer, and arranger from Chicago. She is, we're talking about her third release. It just came out in 2022, but because of the pandemic and because of the fact that I'm just getting this show back up and running, we are talking about it now in 2023. It's gotten rave reviews. It's out digitally, michelethomasmusic.com. I know there's vinyl, there's CDs, there's all that other good stuff. And of course, Michelle's going to be playing around all over the place in the summer. So Michele, congratulations on the third release. And how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good. It's really good to see you, and thanks so much. Yeah, we're it feels good to be getting this out here, and yeah, it's I'm just grateful. Really grateful.
Well, yeah, I know that putting a project like this together is a massive undertaking, you know.
Right.
And I think you and I talked a little bit when I saw you here and there, and I've seen you, you know, not virtually since this came out. And you guys had you guys recorded it during the pandemic, basically, didn't you?
Yeah.
Formulating it. So why don't you talk about what was the inspiration? What was the motivation behind Assumption? And how did the project get off the ground?
Sure. We had been preparing this project probably from 2017 as of performing for the Chicago Jazz Festival, where we did a lot of the material. We had been workshopping a lot of the songs. This was my first debut album with original music that I had written. And we've been workshopping the tunes. We did a full set of them at the Chicago Jazz Fest, and then we did my very first crowdfunding event with a Kickstarter, and a wonderful team there. And so I was so blessed and happy to like really have that entire recording like community funded. Like they really came through and people came through for it. So as we got it funded and it all finished up, and we're just like, oh, this is wonderful, and we're gonna get into the studio, booked our time and all that stuff. And I celebrated my birthday just about a couple of weeks before we were gonna go into the studio. It's like feeling good, and then someone was talking on the news about this virus over in China somewhere. And we're just like, maybe it'll be fine. Yeah, what's that? And suddenly we knew it, like literally a week before we were to go into the studio, everything shut down, the world shut down. And as we all know, it's like just the paradigm shift completely. So it was not only just a matter of just literal life and death, but just like, what is the future going to be for this and for our music careers altogether? You know,
Right.
what is this going to look like? What's the landscape going to look like? So somehow, slowly but surely, through the year, as we were all figuring out like how this thing worked and how safe we could be, we finally got booked into the studio. I want to say yeah, like 20 somewhere, like 2020 21.
Yeah.
And but we're fully masked and everything, and we have all kind of footage of this and everything, but like really just very carefully figuring out how to go and record this. But I have to say, man, it made the music making process that much more meaningful. You know, when we were finally able to see each other in the same room, even when we were socially distanced, there was just like so much emotion behind it, I think, just being able to play that way. And I mean, I really have to believe it made the album that much better because it's like we were just fully present and just like appreciating every note we could play together in a room. So so yeah, we managed to do that in like a 2-day, like just like, you know, marathon, record the whole thing. And then Darren Scorza, drummer on the project, but also producer on the album, and music director, and did a lot of arrangements of the covers and compositions we had on there as well. We came back to also my husband. We came back to our small project studio where he did a great majority of the mixing and engineering and editing further, and any kind of overdubbing and things that we needed to do just to add to it. And so, with just a lot of ingenuity, we got the album together, and finally we're ready to release in 2022. um the meaning behind the album, as I started my songwriting process, I really was in a point in time in my life where I was just questioning a lot that was going on in the world. Questioning our politics and just the state of our society, and race relations, and things that were going on, and trying to get, search somewhere in myself in terms of answers. I think whenever you're in the midst of that kind of turmoil in the world, you're searching for something. And I came to looking at the music that I was writing, and seeing kind of a thread through that, looking at the compositions we were also choosing to arrange for the album, and seeing a thread through those songs. I was seeing kind of like my own philosophical or kind of a spiritual kind of like connection through all of it. And I came to the idea in terms of pulling it all together and calling it The Assumption. And it was just the beginning of a sentence for me, or the assumption of trust, and how we see trust, how we see relationships in our society, how we see our own humanity and relationship to one another and society, and what does it mean to know what trust actually is and how it operates. So once I kind of had that thread, I think it also helped to inform a lot about how we recorded, where the focus was. It really just helped to shape every track on the album, and having that through line and having that full concept. And I think that's also the first time I really had done like a concept album in that sense. So the songs are about relationships overall. I think that's all music all the time. It's always about relationships. But I tend to say, like, most of our songs we know are love songs about some sort of type of love. And I just tend to say about myself that I think that I write love songs, and I gravitate towards love songs about justice, about community, about family, about those types of things. So yeah, that's basically the gist of
Wow.
the album.
Well, and this is the first, you said the first time that you're really featuring your original compositions, right?
Yeah.
So you must have been writing in the past, but you never really released them, or you never put them out
Exactly.
on something. So when you're putting this whole thing together, to your point, pandemic aside, which, I don't know how you put it aside, but
Right.
my show, I'm putting it aside for a second. But you were like in the middle of like the Black Lives Matters, all the looting and the rioting and everything going on, and you can feel that theme in some of these tunes, right? So, talk about, and I'm always curious because, when I talk to composers and arrangers and they're writing music, sounds like to me you came up with a theme for the whatever tune you were writing, and then it probably just opened up your mind and all your creativity to put everything that you were feeling into that specific theme, right? Into that specific, if you name it a certain thing, and you know that you're going to be like, for an example, like No More, which is on the recording. Okay, No More, this is what it's about. And then you just start pouring yourself into that specific subject. Is that how you go about composing?
So actually, and that's not my composition. That is Hubert Law's, and that is John Hendricks. I picked that particular tune because I had found that gem of John Hendricks after doing some years ago. We got together with Alyssa Allgood and Jeff Hedberg, and did a tribute to Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. And in my research on John Hendricks, I found that song and the lyrics he written to it, and he's a hero of mine. I so appreciate his writing, but I'm thinking he's writing this in the 1960s, and I was like, this is kind of a special kind of. There's something about it that sounds like a protest song, but it's different in that it's like very self-empowering, in that day and age. But also I was just like, man, this is still ringing true right now in this day and age. This is still ringing true. And so we did kind of like more of the arrangement that he did when we were performing it. But then Darren came up with just a wonderful arrangement for this album, and we knew we wanted to open up with it because it was hitting, it was so strong.
Well, and that's
And
you know,
yeah.
and looking at the digital version of it, I didn't see, it doesn't say who wrote it or who didn't write it when you're just looking at like the Bandcamp page.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I know a lot of Jon Hendricks music. I had never heard that tune, and the way you did it just made it sound like it was yours and it was from the 21st century.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah. Yeah. No, it spoke so strongly to me, and that made a difference. It, like, even for the compositions on the album, it's like we really took ourselves to task to arrange in ways to really push ourselves in terms of arranging. It's just like how with just getting on the edge of not trying to rewrite the song, but just inserting something fresh into it, like inserting new life into it, and really just I think about just like covering ourselves in the coat of the song, just to like really feel it in its full reality in our own lives. So I'm really happy and blessed to even hear that if people thought
But
that.
you've got a lot of other themes throughout the album. You kind of cover a lot of different topics throughout this album.
Yeah.
I mean, and outside of the topics, the music, you're hitting on. I know we've talked in the past, and those of you that want to get more up to speed on Michelle's background and deep background, check out the hot dog stand interviews that we did, because first of all, they're fun, but second of all, I'll link one up down below. But we talk all about your gospel background and how you started and how you got really involved. And I'm a big believer these days in, I don't go to hear a jazz group play anymore. I go to hear a specific artist play.
Mm.
And with you, a perfect example, and as you grew up, you were exposed to jazz, blues, rock, Latin, soul, all this stuff, gospel. It comes out in your music. That's your voice. And so that's why this album, when you listen from top to bottom, you hear all these different grooves, you hear all these different textures, these different layers, even without even getting into the themes of stuff. Is this the first album that really you were able to just say, you know what, I'm not recording a jazz album, I'm not recording a rock album, I don't care about any of that. I'm going to record a Michele Thomas album because the songs are meaningful behind it, because I wrote a lot of them, and the grooves just work with what I'm feeling per tune. I'm not worried about what style it is. It's my style.
Mm. Um, yes, and I feel like it's the first venture into it, and I'm still trying to get there where you're talking about, as far as I'm concerned. So, um, hopefully by the next album and the album after that, it's more fully formed and present in terms of that uniqueness, that individuality, that artistry. That's something I've definitely been uh working towards and walking towards for a few years now, and it does take some time. Now, like, the more influences you have when it's not just one note, I've started to see in my old age them just like, yeah, that takes time to brew that. It takes time
Mm-hmm.
to like age that.
Yeah.
And and that's good. You want that, you want it where you have a beautiful thing at the end of it. So, and it's just about the artistry, and it's about the individual,
Right.
more than anything else. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and all of us were exposed to so many different genres when we were coming up in this day
Yeah.
and age. I mean, you're younger than me, but still, I mean, I was influenced by rock, blues, heavy metal, everything else. That all comes out in my jazz playing. And, I think that comes out in featured artists like yourself, who's
Yeah.
leading a group, who's leading a music. So that's why I brought it up, because I think that listening to this recording, I never thought that I was listening to a jazz album. I thought I was listening to the Michele Thomas album.
Yeah. And to your point too, I don't know. I've had insight. I've talked with a pianist, Damien Espinoza, who also has a presence on this album and co-wrote a couple of songs here. But we've talked about our generation maybe being something a little bit unique as young jazz artists coming into this art form, where just at the point of our our births in the world and in American music history,
Yep.
that that would be the case, that I think our generation would get more influence, because we feel like there was some kind of shift in that time coming out of the 50s, 60s, where jazz had been a certain thing
Yeah.
for a number of decades. And then you're entering into eras of soul, and you're entering into eras of funk, and we're born into that. So you're gonna absorb what the influences are around you, and we often talk about the fact that we kind of feel like, yeah, that's something very specific to our generation, we think, where it starts to speak to, I want to say, breaking away in a way, but also still taking what those influences are. We all obviously got into jazz,
Hmm.
but then begin to um, just bring these other elements and continue growing it, which has got me at the point in my life where I like really believe that jazz is not. I don't think of it as a genre. I think of it as more of an idiom, and I
Hmm.
think of it as more of a vehicle of, and a philosophy of how you deal with music, how you work with music. I don't necessarily believe in a jazz language, just because that's like, saying that Africa is just a country and there's not a whole bunch of it's like there's too much of a richness and too much that's gone into the history of this music, and I feel like it should be progressive. It should be always growing. So I would hope that our generations have been laying that foundation to continue its growth.
Well, and I think to your point, and you and I could have a conversation about this for the next 2 hours, but we're in agreement of it. But the way you just described it, by the way, I'm going to steal that, just so you know. Thank you very much.
Good.
But that was
Yes.
a great way to describe it as an idiom. I mean, that's what it is. It's a way of playing. It's not a way of conceptualizing stuff, no
Yeah.
matter what genre you're playing. But and then if you want to get really down into the weeds, yes, there's a bebop language. Yes, there's a big band swing language. Yes,
Precisely.
which makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense because now you're segmenting it off.
Yeah.
That there's a post bop, blah 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 blah. I mean, we
Yeah.
go on and on and on. So I just think that the way you just described that, it's perfect. You're
Mm.
absolutely correct. And when you really look into it and you're looking at jazz, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Grateful Dead and a big fan of all those jam band things and stuff like that. And they all listen to John Coltrane and Miles and everybody else,
Exactly.
and it's coming out in their music in different ways. And
Yeah.
I think that in the 21st century, in order for jazz to push forward, it's going to turn into individual artists, and that's who you're going to go see,
Yeah.
because you don't just go to a jazz club anymore and jazz breaks out like
Yeah.
you were in the 60s. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and outside of all that, you find your own voice, and I
Mm.
think that it's very difficult to find your own voice, and I think you're starting to find your own voice. And this recording Assumption, by the way,
Yeah.
everybody should go pick it up. MichelleThomasMusic.com is really, I think this is moving it right into, like, this is Michelle's voice, because I could hear all your different influences, but you had that one solid thing that was you. And that's
Mm.
the whole goal of the whole thing, I think.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So, last thing before I let you go, because I'm always curious about this. I mean, you're writing music, you're writing lyrics, you know what you want to talk about, you know how you want to, maybe you don't know how to say it at first, but you know what you want to talk about. I mean, how do you go about getting the right words and putting it to the right music? Because you might say, okay, I want to focus on this topic, and writing a paragraph is a lot different than writing something that's going to work with music. I mean, did it just come naturally to you, or did you come up with melodies and then put the words to the melodies? Or, I mean, what's
Sure.
the process?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's never easy to answer. And I feel, for one, I'm still discovering my process, but also I feel like it really does change from song to song. It did on this album. Some of the songs, the one that I wrote about my father, I wrote about going to my father's grave. I lost my father to cancer when I was like 13 years old, and had not been back to his grave for 27 years. So the first time I went, I just went and sat, and the song that I would eventually write about that came. It didn't all come to me at that time, but at least the literal title came to me, in terms of just calling it Plot and Stone, very simply. And I talk about that one because it's like, I keep trying to track back, like, how did I start that process, and I honestly can't remember. I don't remember how I wrote
Yeah.
that song,
Wow.
or how that poured out of me. But then with other songs, like, I also wrote one. I started with, you write what you know. And I started with writing also about my late mother and my late sister, and just having those tragedies in my life. But I remember being in the coffee shop, and I remember writing some of the lyrics along the way, and I remember some of the melody coming to me a little bit later on. Um, I tend to journal a lot. I tend to sometimes journal just free thought, and other times stuff does come to me in lyrics, and I just keep stacks of books around, because I go around and I'm just like, that might work as a lyric, or as like, or
Mhm.
that doesn't work at all, or I'll try to force something as, I mean, I'd never know. I have a phone. I think like a lot of songwriters now, I love the technology, it's helping musicians, but voice memos on our phone, that probably has to take up like most of the space on my iPhone, because there has to be like 300 like just little clips of me like just playing piano, like da, 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 or whatever,
Yeah.
just to keep something of it. So it's all different. Even as I'm beginning to write again, and we are gonna start the process now of the next album. um I'm gonna be curious as to how the process is even different for me now, a few years later, after writing this first batch of songs, and if some things will be quicker, or whatever it is. I just know that for me, it's an arduous process. I know every songwriter is different. I've often been jealous of people who are just like, oh, I'm just putting out like 4 or 5 songs a week and stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
shut up. But I also remember, I'm trying to remember, writer of All the Things You Are. Someone was talking about that process, how that song came together, and it was just like, literally, it was just like, you are and then went away a few days, and it's like we have those few notes. It was literally pieced together like until that melody came together so perfectly.
Wow.
And I appreciate that story, because I'm just like, yep, that I feel that.
That's it. That's it. Well, it's all, it's always interesting to me to hear the process behind it. And it's an organic process for
Yeah,
everybody. It's always different. I mean, even with the things that I do, I can't even tell you. I mean, putting things together, sometimes I dread it, because I'm like, oh God. But if I sit somewhere and I keep hammering through it, I finally get to the end point, because if
yeah,
I got up and left, I have a different process than you. So I mean,
yeah.
it's always different for everybody, no matter what they're doing. So it's always interesting to me. All right. Well, congratulations on this recording. Again,
Thank
Assumption,
you.
MichelleThomasMusic.com. Be sure to check out her website so that you can find out where she is playing. I know she's going to have some dates coming up in the summer that she's
Mhm.
going to announce. I'm fairly confident soon. I can feel it coming on,
It's
but
coming. Yeah.
it's coming. And congratulations on everything. And thanks for jumping on today, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. Love talking to you.
Absolutely. And thank you all for watching. And as I always say, all things Chicago Jazz at chicagojazz.com. And until next time, hopefully I will see you all somewhere out on the scene.